All right, everyone, we'll go ahead and get started. Would you guys please join me in prayer? Father in heaven, we thank you once again for bringing us here. We thank you for winter, which has finally arrived in town. We thank you for the gospel, which just fills our lives with real life. And God, as we gather tonight to think about asking questions, to think about digging into people's pasts, I pray that you would take this night, Lord, which is just definitely more on the practical side. Lord, we still desire that your Holy Spirit would attend to what we're doing, that everything that is of you would persist, that anything that is not of you would fall away. Lord, that we would be edified, that we'd be further tooled. And God, I pray especially that as we get closer to the end of this class, that every one of us, I hope, has been working through our own issues, Lord God, but I pray that you would also begin to equip us now to help others. And so God, guide us in this time, we ask. In Jesus' name, amen. So there's two parts that we're going to go through tonight. The first is going to be about life stories, and then the second path is going to be about asking good questions. And as we think about exploring life stories, I think we kind of get the caricature of counseling, which is that you're in someone's office sitting on some sort of like sofa or bed and talking about your childhood, right? And that's kind of like the caricature of counseling. We haven't really explored this much in this class. Do we need to talk about our childhood? So, based on everything that we've looked at so far, anybody want to go so far as to say we don't ever need to look at our childhood, or does anybody want to go so far as to say we must look at our childhood? Everybody going to find themselves on the extremes?
Must.
You're going to say we must?
I think we must.
You think we must? Okay. It is very helpful. It can be very, very helpful. Do we always have to talk about our childhood? I think it depends on the issue. Not everything do you need to go delving into your past to find answers for. Much of the counseling that we do just on a very day-to-day level, you don't need to go into your childhood, right? But you do need to look at the heart. And that's one thing. So a lot of times our day-to-day counseling kind of fails to go deep enough. But as we're talking about, the why behind someone, the why do they do what they do, so often a bigger story is going to help us out. So I think a lot of people enjoy this purely because it's empowering. So if you have never explored your childhood, and you've never thought about how you were raised in the world that you grew up in, and then in your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, you sit down and you really think about it, you begin to draw these connections between who you are today and how you were raised. And for a lot of people, it's empowering because they kind of understand some of the why behind their life, which is fantastic. Now, the danger with exploring your past is, did anybody here tend to be a kind of a blame shifter? Like you get called out on something where you're like, well, it was really more, this thing over here and that driver over there and my coworker over here. Yeah, I love shifting the blame, right? And so I have to be careful, and you might have to be careful if you're helping somebody uncover what's going on in their history about blame shifting. Because the other thing that can happen when you do this is you figure out that you've been through some kind of childhood trauma or some abuse, had some poor modeling, and all of a sudden you feel like you actually can't make changes because you were so destroyed as a child. And no doubt there are ways in which childhood abuse can cripple a person. But we have to be careful not to put so much emphasis on that we lose the power of the gospel in the present. Right? So there's a bit of a balance that needs to be taken as we go about this. Do you guys remember when we threw the whole gospel up on the storyboard? If you were to take any thread through that story, like let's just take the thread of anger, for instance, anger becomes a bigger deal, a bigger issue, the more that you understand the story, which makes the work of the gospel more incredible, right? It's no different in your own life. So when we do the snapshot, right, and when you think about the example of the heart that I had up on the board, and we're talking about anger, right? Well, in that moment, because I'm looking at such a narrow part of my life, it's easy for me to be kind of dismissive about how great the problem can be. But just like with uncovering the big story, you start walking through my life, and if you start pulling on the thread of anger, you might find out that there's a lot more there than met the eye in that particular moment. So sometimes we must go into the life story, because without it, you're always going to be underestimating the extent of the problem or where it comes from or what issues. Particularly if there is some kind of traumatic event in the past that has not been dealt with, that has not been processed, that has not been understood, that has not been lamented over or mourned over or justice sought from the Lord, right? If those things haven't happened, particularly, they can continue to trip us up in life. And so there are some times when it's absolutely necessary. And generally speaking, it's helpful to at least get a handle on those things. So if you're ever doing formal counseling with someone and you're doing some 10-week session, let's say, with somebody, it's a very good idea to get this kind of information. It's helpful. So the way we might think about it is the snapshot versus the big story, right? The snapshot gives us a look into our present situation, our present circumstances, and our present heart responses. But the big story, the whole life, helps us understand how controlling those desires have been. Right? So am I someone who's mastered by anger or not? Well, you're not going to find that out in the snapshot. You're going to have to look at the trajectory of someone's life. Am I mastered by laziness or am I mastering laziness, right? Again, you're going to have to look at the trajectory of someone's life. You're going to have to see the big story. And again, those threads all come together. So let's talk about a method to do this that's not so out there that any one of us couldn't begin to go down this journey. So the first thing that you do is you break life. I mean, you make it clear that we're going to talk about your life, right? So the first thing you would do is kind of just break life up into stages. So as you talk to that person, maybe you discover talking to them, what are the big developmental stages. Now, for most of us, it's fairly similar. It's like 1 through 5, and then it's grade school, like elementary school, and then it's middle school, and then it's high school, and then it's college, and then it's adulthood or whatever, marriage. But it's not exactly that for everyone. Sometimes those look different. So the first thing you kind of do is break up life into stages. And then what you ask this person is just tell me your story. I just want to know about you. And with that, it's good to kind of keep some running questions in that. So you could just say, okay, from when you were from born to 5 years old, who was God? That's one question. So anybody want to take a stab in here if you can remember? Who was God to you between the ages of 0 and 5? Anyone? I can kind of remember that my dad and mom would tell me, God is the creator of everything. And it'd be great. Like as a 4-year-old, you're like, man, it's fantastic. This marker was made by God. And they're like, well, he made everything, and then he gave people the ability to think about it and make it, and so he's kind of the maker of this marker too. And I'm like, huh. But you just told me, and that was I still wonder about that today. It hasn't gone away. But when I think about who was God between 0 and 5, he was the maker, right? That's basically it. And then in grade school, he kind of becomes the holy one who tells me that I'm not holy, right? And then in my high school years, God is that guy who is no fun, right? I have all these fun things I want to do, and he's not wanting me to do any of those things. In college, God's pretty distant. I only reach out to him as a lifeline. So in that season, God is really just a help me get out of jail card, when I'm really messing up and things like that. And then, who is God today, right, in my life? And now he's king, right? And how did that happen, right? So you can track, so you don't go just follow that story, that one question, but you keep asking that question through each phase of life, right? The second question that you could be asking would be about identity. Yeah, who am I? How did 5-year-old Joe see himself, right? How did 10-year-old Joe see himself? How did 15-year-old Joe see himself? And if you go back to 5-year-old Joe, I'm on top of the world. I'm king of the world. But if you go to 10-year-old Joe, there's a very scared kid because I've just gone to like 6 different elementary schools and I don't have friends and I've got headgear. And so it's a very, very different situation. I see myself that way, and those things continue, right? And you continue to ask that question in each era. The next question you could ask is, who are the most important people? And this is another important question because oftentimes these people are, in someone's story, they are the people who have done the most harm, and that'll really dominate a season, right? But maybe in another season, the most important people is someone who did a lot of good, a lot of mentoring, and a lot of times that'll be a positive season, right? And you just kind of begin to explore that. You ask who are the most important people in your life, you get to the end, and mom and dad never come up. That's a big deal. Why were your parents never important people in your lives? What's going on there? And then if you're dealing with somebody who's like counseling issue is their parenting, and I mean there's going to be some stuff there. If you're dealing with marriage counseling, which is a super common one, this question right here is huge because we're learning all the time how to be husbands and wives just in our interactions with people as we're growing up. Another one you could ask is like kind of biggest goal. What was the dream? Biggest goal, dream. That's another question that you can be kind of asking. What were you aspiring to? What did you want out of life? What were you seeking? And then the last one, formative events. And the goal is to go slowly through this. You want to bring it all the way up to the present. This process should take at least 3 to 4 hours, not anything less than that. It's a good way to begin your counseling with someone, particularly if we're dealing with, like, if it depends on what the presenting issue is in counseling, right? Somebody sits down with you at church and they say, hey, what should I do in X, Y, or Z situation? Now is not time for 3 or 4 hours. But let's say you do want to be part of a counseling team at Westside, and it's just some stranger couple coming in off the street with marriage problems, but they kind of grew up in church and they want Christian-centered help, and so that's why they're here talking to you. Oh, this has got to happen. You're not going to be able to understand why this guy is the husband he is and why this woman is the wife she is apart from doing all of that. If you just did the heart model stuff, if you just did the snapshot stuff, you could begin to kind of figure out what's going wrong, but you couldn't begin to understand why these issues are so ingrained. Okay? And nobody comes to counseling, just seeks counseling unless they have got big issues. So you go break it out into stages. Let's say it's 1 to 5, and you go through kind of those 5 questions. You let them talk. The goal is not to keep them on these 5. The goal is to let them talk. And after they get done talking, you've got these notes that you've hopefully been writing. You should fill your notes with quotes, direct quotes. So say, hey, pause. I'm going to just write down exactly what you said right there. Let me see if I can get that in your words. So it's like, God to me was X, Y, or Z. Like, oh, that should be a direct quote sort of a thing. And take extensive notes. Do not wait until the next day to start asking questions. You ask questions as you're going through the process. Tell me what you mean by that. I don't understand that. What is that? So you make sure that you understand. You read the notes that you're writing back to them so that they're agreeing, yeah, that's an accurate telling of the story. And when you're done, you should have pages and pages of notes. Just pages and pages of notes. If you wanted to, you could just do this with yourself. It'd be kind of fun. You could do this with your spouse if you like, to practice it with. If you want to go do counseling at this church down the line, we'll practice this on one another. I don't think we have the time tonight to ask one of you wonderful people to volunteer and do that, but that's what you would do. And then you would try to, with this information, understand this person. So those are two. So the last piece on. Oh, so sorry. I would say verify. That'd kind of be the third step here. I don't know what I wrote quite in the notes, but verify. Go make sure that the story's right. And then it's time to interpret all of this information that we've just got here. How do we go about interpreting all of this?
Is that what you mean by clarifying?
Yes, all of that. Yeah, verify, clarify, ask questions, make sure you read it back to them. All of that stuff is right in there.
Pastor Joe, if you're doing this with a couple, do you do this separately?
No, you do it together. Oh my goodness. Thank you for asking that question. So with a couple, you do it together and you make it very clear you're not allowed to interject on so-and-so's story. You'll get your chance to tell your story later. But yeah, that's super important. So, wife's saying, because like, let's just talk about marriage, right? What's the major life-changing event that everything boils back down to is the day we got married, right? And so you have your kind of timeline before this, and then your timeline after this, and I guess this is, well, yeah, we'll just throw a timeline up, born, married, and then today, right? And you've got all the information on their whole story. You've had them both go. Let's say the husband goes first. Let's say the wife goes first. Whatever you decide to do. I think you have to give the space for the husband to kind of respond to what the wife has said in their story, or space for the wife to respond to what the husband said in their story. And so as they're listening, take notes. Take notes. You can make any point you want to make next time we come back to this. So you're just exploring life stories portion of getting into counseling, especially like with a couple. That might take your first 3 or 4 sessions just to work through all of that. So that could take a long time. And then what you do is you begin to identify themes through all of this. So let's say, just visually speaking, you can set this up however you want. But let's just say under born, you had 5 kind of big paragraphs of information, okay? And then the next stage of life, you had 2, right? And the next stage of life, you had 4. And then, on and on it goes, all the way up to the present. What you're going to try to do then is begin to identify themes, recurring themes, even significant events. So, let's just say, you're doing my story. One of the themes that you're going to see show up a lot would be like the army. You'd see it here, you'd see it here, you'd see it here, you'd see it here, here. Like it just wouldn't go away. It's a recurring theme, an important part of my story, what matters to me. You would see God kind of a little bit on this side, and then all of a sudden, he's showing up all the time over here, right? And maybe you use a different colored marker. Maybe you use a different system. But something you should be doing to kind of go through the story and work through themes. And don't do that alone. Allow the spouses to go do the same thing. Allow the person to go through and do the same thing. And say, hey, here are the notes that I've taken. And it's 7 pages of notes, right? And here it is. It's broken out by age. And what I'd like for us to do is just kind of go through and see if we can identify themes. And maybe you spend 20 minutes reading it, and you circle as you go through, and you get done, and you've got 30 different themes, let's just say, in someone's life as they're unpacking their story. And if you were to do mine, I'm just going to try to go off the top of my head here. You would have, you'd have parents, you'd have headgear, you'd have friends, you'd have God, you'd have being the new kid, you'd hear a lot about wanting to be accepted. You would hear desire for stability, like I don't want to move around a lot. And then you would hear like kind of thankfulness show up later on for going everywhere. Eventually partying starts to show up here. Fun would start to show up here. Girls would start to show up. And you'd get 30 or so different things. You would get like, let's see what else. You'd get trust up here. You would get influence in here, like that I want influence on other people. You'd see significance show up here, that I want to help other people in life, right? So you get.
Trust? You want to trust people? Or you-
I wanted other people to trust me. Yeah. So that would like show up with parents. It'd be basically impossible to tell my story without talking about manipulating trust out of the people around me, so I could go do the partying. So all of those things would show up as themes, right, in life. And what we would do then, at the end of that, is we would just mark anything off the list that is not a desire. So just eliminate all the themes that are not desires, okay? And there are other things you could do, but in this particular example, what we're looking for is a undergirding desire of the heart that's really been driving your life. And if you were to kind of cut my life up between like elementary school to the present, you would see that being accepted and having friends would be the dominant driving desire and behavior of my life from like birth through middle school. And then after that, it's probably a tie between significance and fun, that those two start to become the main desires. But parents isn't a desire. For some people it is. For me, that's not the case. So you would X that off the list. Headgear is no. Friends, yes. God, in this circumstance, probably we wouldn't. He's like a main theme, but not this like overriding desire to have God. Partying would be one. I don't want to be the new kid. I want stability. Thankfulness isn't a desire. It's a thing that's there. Girls, trust, influence. Yeah. So you would take the remaining ones. All right, almost there.
Now, how did you, maybe I
And it's okay. Go ahead and ask. Yeah.
So can you tell me again, how did you, if those are the dominant themes that you got through your counseling, why are you crossing them off?
What we only want to look at is the desires, the things that I really wanted. So you're gonna have other themes in there that you could go through the same thing, and maybe with somebody else you find that abuse is a dominant theme in their life. They're just recurring abuse. Okay, we're gonna cross abuse off the list, not because it doesn't matter, but it's because it's not a desire of the heart. Obviously, they don't want to be abused. There's gonna be some other thing probably related to that. Peace, safety, security, justice, something along those lines that's related to the abuse, and that's what we're trying to get to, okay? And so you've got this list of things up here, and you're really looking for like that dominant desire of the heart, right? Rarely is girls the dominant desire of the heart. Even for a young man who can only think about girls, it's probably not girls ultimately that he's seeking. It might be the pursuit of image, right? It might be actually that for this guy, girls, like if he doesn't have a girlfriend, he just feels like a total loser, right? And that'll come out in the story. You know, when I turned 15, all I could think about was getting a girlfriend. And it was because all my friends had girlfriends and I didn't have one, and that's what I really wanted. Like, okay, well, what you want right there is actually to fit in, and the girl is a means to that end. She's not the actual desire, right? And so you can kind of, with that in mind, begin to knock things off the list. And like friends, for instance, right? Friends are what I wanted, but I didn't really care what friends. I just wanted friends, right? It was acceptance, really, that I'm driving for. Partying was part of that, part of fun, but fun, and maybe you could throw a different word up there. Like, so let's just say we go with fun. Well, partying is in service of fun, but there's other kinds of fun that I like to enjoy. Even fun, though, is a means to an end. And you kind of have to ask yourself, like, what is it that Joe is pursuing all the time when he's pursuing fun? And think biblically about it. Maybe I'm pursuing rest. And what I really want is just to, like in my mind, rest is having fun. Maybe it's pleasure, and I'm just like this hedonist, and what I'm looking for is whatever gives me that next hit of dopamine. And you find a lot of people like that in this life, where their life is dominated by video games, Netflix, and fun experiences, the desire to travel, et cetera, but it's just, I want to have as much pleasure as I possibly can. Maybe they want to be comfortable, maybe they want to be happy, but you're kind of just trying to figure out what's the end of that. What does that serve? And you kind of keep asking that question until you can't ask it anymore. You kind of keep going until you find that ultimate kind of overriding desire of the heart, right? And if you were to kind of just keep plugging away with me, you would discover that, like, significance is really the one that reigns supreme, especially from like middle school forward. And why is that important? It's because in every single social interaction that I have, whether I'm aware of it or not, I'm asking the people around me, make me significant in your life. Right? And like, obviously someone who thinks like this is probably going to end up in counseling, being a doctor, being a pastor, right? Working at the Salvation Army, right? They are going to not feel good at the end of the day unless they're being significant. And what happens is you kind of have all these other desires up on the board, and you can begin to swipe them away, right? But there's going to be one, maybe two, maybe three, but usually one that is so overwhelming and really explains a lot of our behavior in our lives. And so then let's take somebody like me who wants to be significant, and then put them, let's say, in a marriage where the wife thinks that guy is just insignificant, couldn't care less about him, right? Well, what's going to happen in a marriage where the husband's constantly saying, view me as significant, and the wife is constantly saying, you mean nothing to me? What's going to happen in that marriage? It's going to explode. Yeah, they're going to come looking for counseling, right? And so what you'll find, you go through this with a husband and a wife, is that without fail, you're going to find two people who want something and the other spouse is not giving it to them, and it's been that way for years, right? It's been that way for years. So exploring this life story, it takes a long time. It's super important. And then once you get to this, then the next thing you can do.
I have a question.
Yeah, fire away.
The last scenario we spoke of was marriage. Do you have to give them some pre-discussion about what the other person how they can respond to whomever's talking?
Yeah.
You sit there and be neutral?
You got to set out the ground rules hardcore.
What
and
was
you
his
got
question?
So if you're doing this, you're asking people to do their life stories and talk about this, do you let them discuss it freely, or do you set out kind of ground rules before you start, talking about all these things? And the answer is yes. You got to set out ground rules. So when someone's giving their story, the other person is not allowed to be like, no, that's not how it went. That's not what I said. That's a lot. None of that is allowed. None of that is allowed. And I hope you understand why it doesn't actually matter at this point. Because what you're looking for is not to understand what happened in the he said, she said. Trust me, as a counselor who's just coming to the issue, you're never going to figure that out. It's moot. God knows, only He knows. We'll find out on Judgment Day. It doesn't matter. What matters is how you're processing and responding and reacting to all of these things. That is what's important, right? And that's what this will kind of unpack for you. Because what you're trying to do is understand this person's behavior. What drives them? What is causing this ongoing depression? What is causing uncontrolled anger? What is causing strife in marriage? And you'll find, without fail, we all have these desires in our hearts, and they're different for everybody. Like if we were to just kind of go through this room tonight, I would probably discover 20 different things that we all care about, but someone cares about more. So for some of us, it's control. And you might go through someone's story, and the dominant theme is, I was never in control. The decisions were always made for me. And what you'll discover at the end is, okay, like maybe it's control is the thing that you've never had in your life. It's the thing that you've wanted most, and it might explain why you're such an angry 75-year-old, right? Let's just go with that, right? And so yeah, so anger. Sorry, back up. But control, peace, justice, love, acceptance, happiness. There's so many things. There's so many things that we're all pursuing. And it's never a TV. It's never a house, right? It's never that object that we're thinking about so much. It's what that object represents. It's what that object does for the soul. And your job in exploring the life story is to figure that out. Some of us want respect. Some of us want to be acknowledged, for our skills to be acknowledged, right? And on and on and on it goes. So your goal here is to try to get to the last one or the last two. And then the last piece on this, the last piece is you take significance, and in that story, there's going to be a time where you desperately wanted significance and you didn't get it. And then the question is, how did you respond? And you guys remember the spiral from last class? What you're looking for is the spiral, okay? And what starts the spiral now is being insignificant. Being insignificant. And wherever it bottoms out, that's probably why they've come to talk to you. Okay? So let's just say when Joe is not feeling significant, let's just say it's depression. I don't know if that's me, but it could be. I haven't bottomed out in this regard yet, but I sometimes go through the thought experiment of what would I do if I had like some moral failing in ministry and I couldn't preach anymore. I think I would get to depression. I think that's where I'd bottom out at suicide. And so what would happen is I'd go to a counselor and I'd say, I'm suicidal, right? And if it's, well, let's figure out how to make you happy, you're gonna run into difficulty. You're gonna be beating your head against the wall. But if we find out like, oh, hey, Joe, actually what you want is significance, and you've just not been able to deal with that, your coping strategy for being insignificant has led you all the way down to suicidal thoughts. But if we can deal with this, right, then we can have a totally different spiral that's going up this time, and it starts with insignificant, right? And it ends with like worship and joy, but it still starts with insignificance. So that same moment of feeling insignificant doesn't have to, so like let's say I have some moral failing in ministry, I can't be in this role anymore. I don't have to become depressed. I can still, even in that moment, worship the Lord and have joy. And that's the goal here of counseling. How do we get over to that other spiral? So what you would do with that individual after you've kind of identified the dominant desire, that they're just having that will help them kind of understand themselves. And then what they'll tell you, like when was the time that you felt insignificant? And everyone's got a story. So what they'll tell you is, oh, it was the fight of Christmas in 2011, and I'll never forget it, right? And they're like, great, let's talk about Christmas 2011. Well, you know, my mother-in-law came over and blah, 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 right? And on and on and on it goes. And what you're doing there, now you have the opportunity to go to the heart model and begin to unpack the moments that are going on there. But what's going to happen is, there's going to be a set of behaviors here that flow out of that. A set of behaviors, a set of feelings, and you just kind of follow the spiral down. If someone is reliving one of the worst moments of their lives in a story with you and unpacking this all the way to the bottom, have a box of tissues nearby. This is usually a very heart-wrenching and difficult moment. And then they get done and you look at them and you're like, does this look accurate? Is this you? Not just in this moment, is this you in life? And they'll say, yeah, this is me in life. This is how I handle my marriage. This is how I handle my relationship with my kids. This is how I handle things at work when they don't go well. This isn't just here. This is me. This is my life right up here on this board. This pattern, maybe they don't always go down to the bottom. Maybe they go down 4, maybe they go down 5, but it's there, right? We might have different coping strategies for different things, but that's what you do. That's how you process and interpret all of this information, okay? And doing that, again, once you're here, now we can figure out how to find a solution, right? We talked about away at the beginning, you get a good diagnosis of the sin issue. It allows you to have a good treatment plan, if you will. Now we can put together a good treatment plan. Does that make sense? Questions? Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
You're talking with somebody and you can't get a straight line.
Oh, with them? Yeah, that's okay.
It just,
Yeah, sometimes.
just branches and branches and branches.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. Oh, man. So, hey, give me the story from 0 to 5. And like, well, let me tell you what happened yesterday. And you're like, whoa, time out. What I asked was 0 to 5. Start at the beginning. Well, you can't understand the beginning unless I told you what happened yesterday. All right, if they are just hell-bent on making sure that they tell you about yesterday, you say, okay, fine. And you draw a little note on the side of wherever you're taking notes, and you're like, tell me about yesterday, right? And then as they go back to 0 to 5, you're like, I'm going to flip over to another page, and I'm going to do my 0 to 5 notes. And you do something to help you out with them. Don't let them go down pointless rabbit trails. So someone's telling you about the cruise that they went on with their husband before it all went south. Like, you don't need to know about the color of the bed sheets. You don't need to know about the crab legs. You don't need to know about any of that stuff, right? And that's what you can kind of, as they're going through the story, hey, I love all these details. If you keep giving me the crab legs portion of this, keep going on about how good they were, we're going to take like 7 hours to go through your life story. You don't want that. I don't want that. None of us want that. You don't have to say it that frankly. That maybe I would say it that frankly, but you don't say it. You don't. I shouldn't either. Anyways, you just you have them bring it back in. But for you and your note taking, you can just make notes, real easy. This one was from this point. This one was from this point. This one was from this point. And as long as what they're telling you is important, it's okay to jump around. Whatever you have gaps for, you go back and ask. So they get done talking, and you're like, all right, I want to go back to when you were 5. The one thing I was missing was, what was the big significant event that happened back then? And so that's what I'm saying. Like, once they've left and you've gone home and you've started to organize all those notes, and you realize you're missing all these pieces of information, that you don't want that. So as you're going through, kind of keep a mental checklist going and ask those questions as you're going through so that you get all the information. And I mean, give yourself some time. Give yourself 3 or 4 hours to make that happen. That's fine. But yeah, hopefully that helps. Second question somewhere?
Well, mine was kind of the same.
Yeah.
Because some people just like to talk about what he did.
Yes.
Or she did.
Oh, yes.
And I
Yeah.
assume the focus is me.
So what you should be doing when somebody starts talking, well, they did and that person and,
Right.
okay, so like, as you're analyzing them, you're already seeing some behaviors show up here, right? A lot of blame giving. Now, someone starts to, well, this is what they did, and oh my gosh, that's terrible. I understand exactly why you felt that way. Or this is what they did, and you're like, that's actually kind of very normal behavior that probably wasn't even directed at you, but it became everything to you, right? Well, I don't know if this is the best example, but like I think of like when I had headgear, other kids, what did they call me? They called me, do you guys remember the movie Bicentennial Man came out? You guys remember that? Robin Williams? It's like a robot that becomes a human. Anyways, that's what like my nickname was in 3rd grade. That's when the movie came out, right? And so if like every single name that anybody's ever called me comes up in the telling of the story of my life, like, okay, so I know that's important because it says a lot about how this person interprets life. So it's okay for them to unpack all that stuff, but do go back and fill in the gaps. Okay, but what did you think? And what was going on with you? And then at the end, when you go through the notes, what happens is, like, this is what you wrote. These are all the quotes. And I just want to kind of point out, all through your life, you paid attention to minutia in other people's lives, right? And they see it on the paper, and they see it as a theme. And all of a sudden, they're like, oh, man, I care a lot about what other people have said. I care a lot about what other people have done. I care a lot about what other people think. And you have to just be really gentle, because sometimes those realizations are new, and sometimes they're not. But yeah, just be gentle as you do that. But it's okay. Let them tell their story, because as somebody tells their story, you may not think that's important, but it's all important. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great question. Okay. Any others?
Is there a list of common dominant desires? So you mentioned like
Yeah.
significance, love,
Repeat your question.
control.
So she asked, is there a list of common dominant desires? Yeah, I will. Hey, you work at church. This is great. You can remind me of this because I'm not going to remember. There's an article by Ed Welch on the heart and desires, and there's a great list in there of some of the common dominant ones. I will send that to everybody once I can find it. And once she reminds me. Yeah, thank you, Hannah. Great. Yeah, good. Any other questions? All right. So the rest of our time tonight, I want to talk about asking good questions. That's it for tools. I've got no more tools. That's all the tools in Joe's tool belt. Asking good questions. So I've got no more for you in terms of tools. The tools are just tools. The work of counseling is a lot more than that. The tools are just to give you a framework. They're just to give you something to work with, a system to work within to kind of help you understand people. But the work of counseling is, yes, it's partially that, but so much of it is now, okay, now that we see what's broken, how do I apply the gospel to this individual for the fixing of them? And that takes time. But getting to a good diagnosis and using the tools well really depends on asking good questions. So Proverbs chapter 20, verse 5. Love this verse. The purposes of a person's heart are deep waters, but one who has insight draws them out. So you can ask questions trying to drop a bucket, if you will, down into the well of someone's heart. But if your questions are not good, if your questions are shallow, you will bring that bucket up empty, right? Good questions. And this is where maybe just straight up spiritual gifting as a counselor starts to show up. So you guys start going through this, you start asking questions, and you realize, like, I'm really bad at asking questions. All right, that's okay. Maybe God hasn't gifted you for this. That's all right. That's okay. You start doing this, and every time you pull that bucket up, you're getting way more information than you've ever expected. Okay, you might have the gift of counseling. You should consider doing something like this, okay? Counselors that can't ask the right questions, they're not worth their salt. And a counselor who can ask the right questions is worth their weight in gold. It's not about getting someone to say what they don't want to say. Okay? And you walk into a counseling session, there are things that people are hiding. It's not like some gifted counselor gets people to just confess. That's not what's going on. A gifted counselor is going to help someone feel safe enough to share, but also draw out the realizations from this person that maybe they're not even aware of. You're not looking for what's on the surface. You're not looking for what they've already thought about and what they've already worked through. That's led them nowhere. You're looking for what's underneath that, right? And this is the work of a counselor. It is not easy. It is a strange skill. And I was dreading this night. The last thing I want to try to teach you guys how to do is ask good questions because it's so weird. But as you do it and as you practice it, you'll get better at it. Quick question? Yeah.
When this occurs, the way you say it occurs, you're going to learn things that you can't tell anybody else,
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
not even the wife.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, your spouse got, especially if you do counsel at church, your spouse is usually not a great person to confide in because, part of the reason that you want to tell somebody anything is that you're bearing this kind of piece of information and it's changing the way you think about an individual. And it's tempting to share that load with somebody else. But oftentimes that's a terrible thing to do. Gossip is incredibly selfish, right? If it's a temptation for you to think negatively about somebody, don't share that temptation with somebody else. Yeah, it's good. Okay, first thing I would say is get some of your heavy lifting done with a questionnaire. If you guys want, I could send you a sample of that. If we have a counseling ministry at Westside, we will use questionnaires to start the whole process off. They're usually 1,000,000 pages long, and they work through a bunch of different things, and they have you talk about a lot of stuff, and you use that questionnaire to kind of start the whole process. So their history, which should be in there, their physical health should be in there, spiritual habits, relationship with God, what they think the problem is. That's where you start, and then you kind of interpret that data. Remember in the spiral thing, right? If they're coming to talk to you about a broken marriage, right, that's really the issue at the bottom. And so they're going to say, well, this is what's going on, and this is why that is happening, right? And you want to know what they think the issue is. Because I guarantee you, most people don't come with a broken marriage thinking like, the issue is that I want respect, and I'm not getting it, and I need to just surrender that to the Lord so that I can love my wife. Most people are not saying that. What they're usually saying is, my wife disrespected me, and now I want you to fix her, right? That's why most people come to counseling. I don't know if you've ever had that happen, but it happens. Like, I really want to talk to you. Actually, I want you to talk to my wife. Okay, all right. Well, we'll see here. Okay. So anyways, you work with that, and that starts to kind of help you understand a person, and a good questionnaire can do a lot of work for you, so you start there. When it starts to... When it's time to start asking questions, I'd say the first thing you do is, and I know safe space is kind of like a trigger word nowadays, but it really is important in a counseling session that they understand that this is a safe place to be open, to be honest, to explore what you're thinking without being judged. Any verbal processors in the room? Yeah? 1, 2, yeah. I'm not, my wife is. She's a verbal processor. And it took me a while to figure out, like, I don't need to give you input on what you're saying. You're still thinking through it, right? So she says something, I'm like, well, that's wrong. Let me show you what the truth is. Like, she's going to get there. She's just still thinking through it. So when you're in the counseling room, one way to make it not safe is somebody's just verbally processing. You don't realize it. You go start correcting them. Like, hey, it's not a safe place anymore, right? Same thing happens in our marriages. So you will not get an honest answer out of somebody if they don't trust that they can be honest in that moment, and you will waste a lot of time in counseling if that doesn't exist already. You will know in counseling sometimes that people are holding back information, and it will be so tempting to go and chase that down. Don't. Build up the relationship and gently coax that out of them in time. Let them open up about it. Maybe it's okay to kind of tug at it a little bit and then just say, hey, but it's up to you. If you're ready to talk about it, go ahead. If you're not, no worries. But don't let your pride say, you have to open up to me. Let love kind of dictate the pace at which those things take place. one thing that I recommend is give a low stakes question and respond without freaking the other person out. What do I mean by a low stakes question? So if you were like counseling me, it'd be like, Joe, tell me about how did college turn out for you, right? And it's not a secret that I dropped out of school. It's not a secret that I partied so hard I had a 1.9 GPA, right? And so it's a low stakes question because it's already kind of known, right? And so with a marriage that's like falling apart, like there are issues that are already kind of known, right? And so you can ask about an already known issue. It's low stakes, but it's what you win in that is by your response. So when you respond with love, with care, when your heart breaks for them, that's what helps. So that's something that I do a lot in the counseling room is I ask low stake questions. I ask questions where I already know the answer. It's not about getting an answer. It's about showing compassion to this individual. And that a lot of times is the next piece that'll open up. And even if I can relate to them, then I relate to them. Right? So I'm like, I was there too. This was my story. So I feel you on that. And that's building relationship. A lot of counseling books would say, don't do that. I don't know. I do it. I don't think it goes bad, at least for me, but it's up to you. I want to create that space. That's really important to me. They are going to also test you. So they are going to put feelers out. So if there is a story that is scandalous, they will give you 5% of it just to see how you respond, right? And we do this without thinking about it all the time in our interactions. You need to recognize those moments when they come. Because when they put the feeler out, your jaw drops and your eyes get all big, that's it. That's the end of this, right? Again, like you look for those feelers, and you say, this is the moment to pour out love. This is the moment to pour out grace. This is the moment to say, man, I'm sorry that happened to you. Or, man, I'm sorry that what you just did. I can understand the guilt and the shame that you're experiencing, but I want you to know that Jesus' mercy and grace in abundance beyond measure and completely covers every iota of that. This is the moment to capitalize on they're throwing a feeler out there. You shower them with love. Okay? So just want that to be clear. The last thing I would say is when you are asking questions as a counselor, sometimes for the other person, it can kind of feel like they're on the witness stand. And the lawyer's giving them a line of leading questions, right? So here's where we have to be careful. In the courtroom, a line of leading questions leads to a gotcha, right? And the goal is to trip you up and to tear you down. Well, they need to know in a counseling room that if you are asking a line of leading questions, it's going to take them to a good place and not to a bad place. And so sometimes it's good to just explain, not to say to somebody, hey, I want to find out the idol of your life that, is the reason for why you're so messed up. We don't say that, but we might say something like, desires have a strange relationship with behavior. There's a link there. And I don't know why you do what you do. It sounds like you don't know why you do what you do. Maybe, is it all right if I just ask you a couple questions, trying to figure out what the desire is that's most important to you? Because I just want to see if that affects your behavior. Like, would you be willing to walk through that with me? And they're like, oh, okay, we'll give it a go. And then you've been thinking about their life, and you're like, I've noticed 3 things that showed up a lot in your life story. One was acceptance, one was significance, and the other was fun. Can we just kind of see which one is most important to you now, right? And kind of just explore that with them, and that way they don't feel like you're leading them on. Now we're on a mutual exploration of this person's heart, of this person's mind, of this person's soul, and we're not upset about what we find. We're just looking for whatever, right? And you make that clear, like, hey, those 3 desires, none of those are wrong. We're just going to figure out which one's usually calling the shots. Okay, let's go. If you're going to go do the spiral thing, right, with somebody, like, hey, I want us to kind of walk through a difficult day in your life. I don't want to do this to hurt you. I don't want to do this make you relive everything, but I do want us to slowly go through it, because if we slowly go through this spiral this one time, I promise that you will have a new power that you've never had before to not go back down it again. You're going to be more aware of this than you've ever been, and next time you'll be able to get on the other side and pursue the Lord. And so would it be okay if we go back to that moment in your story? And they're like, oh, okay, let's go, right? But you don't start approaching that moment, asking them what happened next, what happened next, what happened next, without explaining why, right? So these are all ways, at least that I personally try to create a safe space when I'm counseling other people. I'm sure there's a million more things that could be done. Those are just some of the big ones for me. I want to give you some guidelines on asking questions. You'll typically hear never ask closed questions in a counseling room. I disagree with that thoroughly. Open questions and closed-ended questions are great. You just use them differently. So the open-ended questions need to be driven towards story. I think that's just an effective way of communicating, especially with people who aren't good communicators. They can still usually tell a decent story. I mean, sometimes you get somebody who's just totally scatterbrained, and then it's not so great, but that maybe you need to use a closed-ended question. But otherwise, story is super important. Anybody know of a guy named Malcolm Gladwell? I'm just curious. Yeah? He's a writer for a magazine, and some people call him the best interviewer of all time, kind of like a Larry King type guy. And he tells this great story about asking questions. So he backpacked Europe for 10 years and did it with almost no money, right? Backpacked the world, not just Europe. And he tells this great story about a good question and the power of a good question. He's like, when you don't have any money and you're getting on the bus and the bus is going to somewhere like in Poland or something, somewhere in Poland. And he's talking to the other guy in this podcast I was listening to. He's like, who would you sit next to if you didn't have a place to sleep that night? You know, if you're the young man, and it's like, there's the beautiful girl in the front row. Maybe she lets you stay at her house for a night, maybe not. If it doesn't work out, you're homeless. Like, where do you sleep? And he's like, I don't know. And he's like, you sit down next to grandma, and you ask grandma one question: how do you make the best goulash, right? And grandma goes on this big tirade about goulash, but you don't speak Polish, you don't speak English, which gets some other kids involved. They're translating, they're going back and forth. Eventually, grandma's like, I've been riding this bus for years. You guys have never asked me how to make a good goulash. This American comes, he asked me how to make. Everyone's coming to my house tonight, and we're eating goulash, right? And it turns into 6 weeks of homes to stay in and food to eat and parties to attend, right? The power of one good question. So why is that a good question? Is how do you make a good goulash, right? It's kind of open, it's kind of closed, but what it led to was fantastic. And so when you think about open-ended questions, I encourage you to think that way. How do you ask a question that leads to a story, that leads to this person opening up and telling you more, right? So you find out as that person's given their story and they get passionate about that, just start asking questions about what they're passionate about. And you're gonna uncover pieces of this person that may not at first glance seem to relate to what's going on, but when you step back the next day and you start to unpack all of this data, you're going to start to see these connections and these themes. Now, closed questions have a totally different purpose. Closed questions are for clarifying points in the story. Was it this or was it that? Not asking, why did you get so mad? Like you're already talking about someone who's angry, right? And not asking, why'd you get so mad? Asking, like, what happened that week that made you angry? Right? You're asking a very specific question. I want to know this. And they start to get into it, and then you say, so was it the red light or was it the person who flipped you off? Right? Like, and you start to narrow things down. So closed-ended questions have a purpose. You just got to figure out when to use what. And that's when you're trying to begin to filter information. What's more important and what's less important? What's a big driver of behavior? What's a lesser driver of behavior? And so you find out like, well, 60% of it was that and 40% of it was that. That's an important thing to know as you're working through all of these things. So that's open versus closed questions. Ask questions to seek understanding, not to prove assumptions. So if you've got an assumption, even if you're going to test your assumption, you don't do it to prove it, you do it to test it, to explore it. So you go through that other person. I want to explore your heart for a little bit. Can we do that? I want to understand you more. I don't want to make a judgment. I want to prove my theory on who you are. I don't want to, you're doing some counseling in marriage and you think you've got this guy figured out. Like, okay, I'm gonna go fish for the answer that I've got figured out here. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. You go seeking understanding. You go assuming that I've got an idea. That's just an idea. We're gonna go explore this together. So ask questions to seek understanding. A question that's proving an assumption would say something like, what were you idolizing? What lies were you believing? What did you do to get the justice that you wanted? A question that seeks understanding would be more like, what mattered most to you in that moment? How did you, when you didn't get that, like, how did you feel? What came out of that? What did you take any steps to get what you wanted? Just a more open-ended, more understanding question. Biblical language and their language. So people are going to use, like we've been through this several times in this class already, but we have like 17 words for angry in English, right? What is that about? So the Bible uses anger. So as you're talking to someone, I wasn't angry. I was frustrated. And you can say, well, you're not going to see the word frustrated show up in the Bible. But you will see the word anger showed up in the Bible. So I'm not going to deny that you were frustrated. You were frustrated. But I'm also going to use the word anger. Is that all right if I use that? As I'm talking about it, anger and frustrated. And, be gentle with that. If they're not okay with that right away, like, it's all right. At a certain point, you have to bring everything back to biblical terminology so you can start working on that. There may be issues where you can't use their language. And particularly in our day, those things might come up around homosexuality or transsexuality, where it was like, well, back when I was a man, like, well, I'm not going to use those words, okay? Because I always think you were a woman, or that's the way that God sees you. And again, this is biblical counseling, so we can make that apparent from day one. And as long as they're understanding, like, hey, when I say this is why I'm saying it, and you can call yourself that, but I'm going to use, these words. I'm going to use biblical words, and hopefully they're understanding. And if not, that's why we put the word biblical above the counseling. So that's real clear from day one. Okay. Learn to read people and change accordingly. Right. Learn to read people and pivot. I can't teach you how to do this. There are books actually out there that can. So, I mean, you can go you can go watch a quick YouTube video and learn a ton about body language. But as you ask a question, that's really the first thing you should be watching. Not what are the words that are about to come out of this person's mouth. When you ask a question, the first thing you need to think about is body language, and you need to pivot accordingly. So if the question comes out and that person just stares at you, they probably don't understand what you just said. They're probably not just thinking over there, right? So you need to think like, okay, is the silence here happening because they're thinking hard and coming up with a solution? Or is this silence here happening because they're just trying to figure out what just came out of my mouth, right? And if it's the latter, then you need to rephrase the question, right? That's just plain and simple. If the question went too far, if the question was offensive, then you ask, I'm sorry, I feel like what I just said offended you. Was there something in there that was offensive to you? And they're like, actually it was this thing that you said, that I hate it when people use this word. I'm like, oh, good to know. Thank you for that. I did not mean to offend you. I apologize. I'm going to make a little note on my side. I will not use that word as we're talking here for now, right? Sometimes the word is something you can't get around. Don't use the word grace around me. All right, for today. And as we're talking about this, I'm not going to use the word grace. I can't promise that I'll never bring it back, but thank you for letting me know, and I'm sorry. So you got to be watching for all of those things. In general, when you're asking questions, body language means generally, rephrase the question, come back later to this issue, don't deal with it right now. Educate this person on why you're asking the question you're asking, or just wait. I'm going to build up the relationship before I come back to this issue down the line, okay? Ask questions that will uncover history and uncover the heart. So, uncover history and uncover the heart. So you do want to know the story, but you also want to uncover the heart. So if you can reveal with your questions, remember the inside categories of the heart, of your thoughts and of your emotions and your desires and of your will. If you can ask questions that begin to peel back that's really where you want to be. And if you go back to your notes from previous weeks on the heart, there's a lot of questions in there that you could go back and look at. Those are the really direct ones that you have in your head. You have to translate that into that present moment. Sometimes, if you want to understand someone's history, you use history. So you want to know about why a person did X, Y, or Z, and you see a parallel in the life of Moses, you just say, the Bible tells about this one story with Moses. It kind of goes like this. Like, what's your story on that, right? So there's segues into that. Uncovering the heart. Sometimes what you do with that is maybe you kind of just throw this up on the board. You say, hey, this is kind of like your heart right here. And then you've got God over here. And in your story, in life, did you know that we're always responding to God, and that God's always working on us? Like, what would your response to God be if you could think about that in this moment, right? And so throwing a little paradigm up on the board so that you can begin to uncover some of those heart things is completely fine. The goal in counseling, one of the goals in counseling is to raise awareness. Do you guys remember that back at the beginning? Raise awareness. So all you're doing as you do that is educate someone. It's very, very, very helpful in terms of uncovering the heart. Ask people always to define their terms. Always ask people to define their terms. Someone says, I was depressed. I'm like, what does that mean, right? I struggle with anxiety. What's anxiety? I don't know. Okay, well then let's talk about it, right? Let's make sure we've got definitions for all of those categories. And so words that are super common are probably the most important for us to define. You get a simple word like anger, and it's crazy how crazy our definitions can be, how self-deceived we can be on all of those sorts of things. So depression, anxiety, anger, sadness, fear, on and on it goes. Ask questions about what all of those mean. And then as you are asking questions, something that I do personally is I'm always noting out heart responses. So if you were to look at my notes in counseling, if someone's heart response is in view, man, there's a star there. So they say, my kids disrespected me and I just blew up. I'm like, bingo, heart response, right? My dad hit me and I ran to my room. Bingo, heart response, right? And so I have that little moment, like my dad hit me and I ran to my room. I don't know why you've run to your room yet, but I know that was a heart response, right? I know that if we uncovered your heart, we'd be able to figure out why you ran to your room. Why your room and not the playground? Why run and not walk? There's going to be all of these pieces there as you uncover that that are going to reveal the heart. So look for heart responses. You mentioned earlier, I noticed in this person, they're always blaming other people. Heart response. Bingo. Another one. Absolutely. Okay. As you ask questions, use the heart model, use the spiral, use life stories. Any one of those three paradigms that we've gone through in this class, any one of those three tools, you should use that in your own head or even on the piece of paper as a guide for asking your questions. So you're mentally thinking through the heart, or you have it on your sheet of paper and you're asking that. You're going through the life story. That one's very structured. The spiral, very structured. But something like that, you need some sort of scaffolding to ask good questions. If you don't have that in your head, you'll just end up with a hodgepodge of pieces. So you got to have some sort of system as you approach this. So remember, with the heart model, we have God, we have people, we have circumstances, we have self, all of those things on the outer context, and then thoughts, feelings, desires, will on the inside. Remember, with the spiral, begin by asking this person, tell me the story of what happened on this day after that happened. And then you're asking, and then what? And then what? And then what? I think what's really important here is you're not always asking about the next event. Sometimes the next thing that happens was a thought. Sometimes the next thing that happens was a feeling. Sometimes the next things that happened was an action. So break it down to that granular level if that's the way that you're asking questions. If you do the life stories, you can do the one that we threw up there earlier. And then lastly, understand these things. So the first thing is, as you ask the questions, you need to listen. You need to listen. And you need to be drawing connections as often as you can. So if you got, let's say you're asking questions according to the heart model, and that's the way that you're exploring this issue, and they're telling you what they've been thinking about, and they've given you a desire or a feeling, and you see a connection, you need to point that out, like in your notes somewhere. So someone's like, well, I felt really guilty. And you ask, well, why did you feel guilty? And it's like, well, because I believed that if I brought home anything less than an A, that I was just bringing shame on my family. I'm like, okay, I've got a thought, I've got a feeling, I've got a connection, right? Be thinking about that as you go through. And then like, okay, where did that thought come from? People, right? Outside, parents, right? And so there's all these pieces there that you need to have. Functionally, 4 things. Who is their functional God? Which means who calls the shots in life? What is their functional desire? What is the actual goal they're perceiving? What is their functional identity? Not what do they think they believe about themselves. What's the actual identity that they are operating in? Belief system. What I would put this is, what's the economic principle in play, right? Is it works-based righteousness? Is that what's in play here? Is that where all the shame and the guilt is coming from? You might know the gospel, but you're believing something else. Is it like a tit-for-tat kind of justice? Is he hit me, so I hit him, right? Are they operating in grace? Are they operating by faith? You got to figure out the kind of operating system, the belief system in play. Functionally, you need to identify that as you go through this, because remember, sin happens when we're forgetting the gospel. It's not going to be the gospel. It's going to be some other alternate belief system that's come in its place. Think about why the person's seeking counsel and what must be actually dealt with to get to that issue. So they came here to talk about depression. Actually, we need to talk about X to get to depression. You need to have that clearly in your head in counseling. Otherwise, depression will steer the ship and you guys won't get anywhere. You've got to see deeper to the heart issues. And lastly, we compare that whole system, all of these pieces. Who is God? Who is this person? What are they operating by? What's the issue? All of that. We compare that with the gospel. And now, all of a sudden, we have a way to help this person through their sin struggle in a way that they've never been helped before. Because the problem's clearly seen and the solution's clearly seen. And now, the rest of counseling begins. Of how do you begin to apply these truths to someone's life and help them to apply these truths to their own life. Because you can preach, but if they don't do the work, there's not going to be any change. So there are limitations to what we can do. Question?
How much time will this course spend on body language? Not only us reading them, but them reading us. 'Cause I have a tendency to overread people.
Yeah. Don't overthink it. Yeah, don't overthink it. And yeah, even in your own body language, if you're saying happy, loving things, but obviously your body language is distracted, you want to be someplace else, they're not going to feel the love. So that's super important. That's good.
Have direct training or?
No, I am not the guy to train on body language. There are ways in which I'm like too honest, and that's one of them. So you guys can go watch some YouTube videos on any of that stuff. I'm not the guy to train on that, but thanks. Any other questions tonight?
Has anyone, have you ever known somebody where you think that they might need help or whatever and approached them and said, and not said you, I think.
And offered counseling? Yeah.
Well, not offered.
Oh.
Oh, did you use those words?
Uh,
I don't mean that. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I really like to talk.
Oh, that I do all the time. Yeah. Like, hey, I see you got this going on. Let's get coffee. They have no idea that I'm biblical counseling them. Yeah. Yeah. I do that to all of you all of the time. Every time you bring anything to me, this is how I see you. So yes, Christine, all the time. All the time. And I hope it becomes the way that you see each other. Yeah. One more.
This counseling, is it for family members?
Yeah, it's for everybody. It's for anybody with a heart and a relationship with God and the Holy Spirit. Absolutely. Yeah.
Second question.
Yeah.
Some people lie to counselors.
All of you. Yeah. Yes. Some people do lie to counselors. Yeah.
And ongoing, when do you just break it off?
I think once you've caught someone in a lie, because you don't know until then.
Remember when you said
Yeah.
you were going to repeat the question?
Oh, sorry. The question was, what do you do like in a situation where you're counseling someone and there's ongoing lies, right? So when you've caught them in a lie, you show them grace. I'm going to lovingly confront you. This is what happened. Please let me know. I'm not going to assume, but please tell me what's going on. Why are we in this situation? Because sometimes they're not lying. Sometimes they really believe what they're saying. Other times they're straight up lying to you. And I think at that point you have to kind of drop back to, this is why you came to counseling. Do you actually want help or not? And a lot of times people are like, no, I'm just doing this to make my wife happy. Okay, well, I'm not going to waste your time. And I've got bad news for your wife. But if you're lying, you don't actually want to change. Okay, it is 7:21. We've got to end tonight. No prayer. Sorry, guys. Love you all. Pray on your own. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.